Welcome to Human. Today I talk with Heidi B all about her book, Relationship Ready: How to Stop Fucking Randos and Start Cupcaking Your Soulmate. And so truly this episode is exactly how it sounds. We talk super fast, we're very excited, and we talk all about how to stop negative habits of dating and really start to change your attitude, change your methods, change your patterns into finding someone that you really care about. And how do you do this? So through all of our chatter, there's many things that can be really taken away. The first thing we really dive into a bit into the episode is writing out every single pattern and experience you have had with every relationship, hookup, situationship, anything like that, and you can really figure out your pattern with, for me, men, but for you, whoever you're attracted to, whoever you're interested in, and a lot can be taken away from that, and that's sort of the first step. And we also dive into different dating rules, like not kissing until the fourth date and not sleeping together or having any sleepovers until you're exclusive. And really, I love Heidi outlines all of this in her book. She talks all about her own personal experiences, and then she really encourages her readers to do their own personal work to change how they date and to get ready for a relationship if that's what they really want. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you read Heidi's book. It is so good. I've read it twice. It's a quick read. It's a great read. I really enjoy it. Check her out on all her socials. Her book is available on Amazon, and make sure you follow me on Instagram at Jessica J. McDonald and at Human to Human Pod. Subscribe if you like the show and leave a review. It means so much. So today we're going to be chatting all about your book, Relationship Ready: How I Stopped Fucking Randos and Started Cupcaking My Soulmate. And in this book, it's so funny. When I actually ordered it back in the summer, I have like my Kindle attached to my dad's Amazon account, and he was like, what did you just buy?
Oh my God. Right after I launched the book, I was at a conference, pre-COVID. I was at a conference and I met this woman and we became really good friends. And she's like, well, I'm already in a relationship, but I'm going to buy your book because like, I want to support you. And so she said her husband was on their Amazon account and was like, what is this? And she's like, I swear it's just like a friend I met at, whatever. So
that's hilarious. But honestly, it's great. So in this book, you talk about alcoholism, you talk about self-worth, and like this rock bottom that you got to of this relationship that you had with men where, you were sleeping with people and you didn't have genuine connections with them, and finally discovered like, I want to really focus on myself and grow my own self-worth in order to create a sustainable monogamous relationship.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your platform with me, for having me on the show, like for reading the book. It always blows my mind when anyone, I know how many books I sell, like Amazon tells me how many books I've sold or whatever, but like anytime I actually speak with someone who's like, I read it, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe my heart is so full for that. So thank you for taking the time to read it and for reaching out. And yeah, for me, what happened was it is like half memoir and half how-to. So the first half of the book really tells you about like coming of age for me, my earliest relationships. I personally am a sober alcoholic in recovery. I had to get sober to do the work that's outlined in this book, but not everyone has to do that. But because it's part of my story, I tell you about it. And a large part of it is just like, I put all my shit on blast because I'm like, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say I put all my shit on blast because later in the book, I ask you to put your shit on blast. And I want you to know, like, I've done what I'm asking you to do. So, for me, I was like 2 years sober and just kind of bopping around Portland. I was really kind of like, I was in this, like, I do what I want. I like had stopped because I had stopped drinking. I didn't do any drugs. I had a job. I was showing up to work on time. When I moved, I forwarded my mail. I was like really adulting, and I started to feel very like entitled that I was like, I don't have any vices left. My last two vices are like parking illegally and fucking whoever I want, so I do what I want. So I like really got into doing those two things.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Because I just felt like, oh my God, I'm living like such an above board life. I like need a way to act out, right? So I'm parking illegally, getting all the parking tickets, and then screwing whoever I wanted to. And so I made this arrangement with this guy, and I tell this story in the book, but it's important because it really is this moment where the bottom fell out for me. So I had seen, I was born in 1980. I'm a lot older than you are, but I came of age really during like Sex and the City and sexual empowerment. And I'm like, I've seen Sex and the City. I know what it's like to own my sexuality and step into my power, and I'm going to fuck whoever I want to. And that's going to be part of it. So I had made this agreement with this guy that we were just going to like get together and get down. he had a girlfriend at the time. And so that made sense for him and it made sense for me. And we had this chemistry. And for months we did that. And then eventually he broke up with his girlfriend. And then a couple months after that, he came to me and asked me like, hey, do you think we could like get down and go to dinner or like get down and go to a movie? And I said to him like, we can do that, but that's dating. And he was like, well, I was clear with you in the beginning. I don't want to date you. And at that moment, really the bottom fell out for me. And I realized that even if months prior, when I had made the arrangement with him, that honored my truth, that felt good to do that. By this time that he and I had this conversation, my thoughts about him and what we were doing had changed. And that I was lying to myself because I was really hoping, this no strings attached sex thing was no longer honoring my truth, because my real truth was I was hoping that he was going to dump his girlfriend and choose to date me. And we were going to like go off into the sunset together, So I called this girlfriend of mine who had done some work around men and relationships, just crying. Like, I can't believe that this is, because it wasn't really the first time that something like this had happened, but it just was so painful to have to reconcile what I really felt with versus what I really felt with the story that I was telling myself about it. It just really was painful stuff. So she was like, well, we can do this work and on and on. And so I did the work that I outlined in the book, Relationship Ready. It took me 11 months to do it. So I am stubborn. I am slow. I did it kicking and screaming. One day I'll never forget, she had asked me to limit my interactions with men because I was so addicted to the attention I was receiving from them. So I was doing that. I wasn't talking to any men at all. And I remember one day I called her up. I had to pull my car over because I was crying so hard because I felt like, oh my God, I can't believe that I have to be friends with stupid women like you for the rest of my life. And I don't get to be friends with, and she was like, oh my God. She was like, it's fine. You're going to be fine. And to this day, she is like a ride or die of mine. I really discovered doing that work that I had always put my relationships with women secondary in my life because the attention I got from men was so valuable to me. And so when I put them on pause, I built these relationships with women that were incredible and that are sustainable and that are, 7 or 8 years on, still huge parts of my life. So she was so gracious for holding that space for me while I really felt my feelings of discomfort. So that is a very long, I don't even know what question you asked, but that's kind of the long setup to, I know what, I'm getting there. Okay. So then after I did all the work, it took me an entire year to get through all this stuff. And then another almost year to date people before I found my husband. And then I thought, there are women who are out there that are suffering in their relationships, that are feeling the same way I felt, where they keep choosing the same guy over and over again, the same woman over and over again, and they just don't know how to choose differently or change these patterns. And I'm like, those women need to know that they are not alone. So that truly is the why. That's why I'm willing to put out all my bad decisions. It's why I'm willing to talk so candidly on interviews, so frankly in the book, because it's like, I know how painful it was to feel like I was the only person who didn't understand how to do it differently. And I just don't ever want anyone to feel like they're alone when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so much of what you talk about in the book, I resonate with. And I think right now, especially too, I can speak on like my generation, it's so normalized to just sleep with random people and to just be a part of that culture and to think like that's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what your 20s are for.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to be like, this isn't what I want. This doesn't make me feel good, and challenge that. And so it's so refreshing to kind of read about that. And another thing I want to talk about before we get into kind of like the steps and the actual process is like where your mindset was, before you decided to do the work, being, not having the best self-worth, like you said, and trying to be this cool girl and seeking that validation. Yeah.
Well, before we get to that, I do want to mention like what you're talking about with hookup culture. And I think, on the one hand, I think it's so awesome that these days, like, there's almost, we're becoming more and more acceptable of whatever kind of sex you want to have. Right. So like, there is this piece of it where it's like, we're broadening our horizons. We're more inclusive and more open-minded to polyamory, to, I don't know. It's like, that's just the first one that comes to mind, to kink, to whatever it is. But at the other hand, I mean, hookup culture really does us a disservice by asking, by I don't know if it asks us to do this, but for women in hookup culture, it creates this space where we're not proud to say, hey, I'm hot and I want to be monogamous, maybe, right? Like that may not be for everyone, and that's okay if it's not for everyone, but for those of us that it is, it just becomes hard to really step into the power of asking for what we want, because hookup culture demands that we just be like, it's cool. whatever, it's fine.
Yes. And then that comes back to being this cool girl who's what I'm good with whatever. And I found myself in a situation where I'd been with a guy and sleeping with him and we had a really good emotional connection. And then it got to 2 months and he was like, yeah, no, like I don't see us dating. And I was like, I thought we were doing that. Like
that's what we're doing. Because I honestly, and one of the things I think is sad about that effective hookup culture is that I think there's nothing more powerful, more sexy, more cool than a woman being like, I know who I am and I know what I want and you meet my requirements and like, let's explore this, right? There's something really cool and sexy about stepping into the power of owning your desires, of honoring your truth. And I think that is one of the largest detriments to hookup culture is that a lot of us deny our truths in order to fit into hookup culture. So, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I like that we have verbiage around it today. Like 15 years ago, we really didn't have the same language around hookup culture that we do today. So, I love having that conversation because it is important to go like, look, if you're enjoying hookup culture, keep doing it. But if you get to a place where hookup culture is no good for you anymore, now I want you to know there's support out there for you. There's books, there's communities, there's coaches, there's all this stuff so that you don't have to go through this on your own,
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important too, to communicate with whoever you're with, what they want, what they're looking for, and then take their word for it. Because I think it is really common for, people like, oh yeah, we're hooking.
It is like, what's that? I want to say it's Maya Angelou, but I'm afraid I'm misquoting her, right? Where she says, I'm sure it's her, where she says, when people show you who they are, trust them the first time.
Yeah.
Right. And you're asking that guy, oh, I want to be together. And he's like being wishy-washy about it. It's like, he's giving you some information. Yeah. And it's important that you don't just like gloss over it or try to twist it to be what you want it to be. It's like, how can we get information from our partners and really honor what they're telling us as well?
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's crazy. Like you entered that relationship or that situation where you were sleeping together and he was like, I don't want to date you. But then subconsciously you're like thinking he'll leave the current relationship for you.
Oh, I'll change his mind. Oh yeah.
And I think it's so common to subconsciously get into that mindset of, oh, I'll change his mind or, oh, maybe I'll be the one who's different. And it's like, no, let's take their word for it. Whatever they're communicating to us, let's roll with that.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah. And so I love the work you do, but before we even go into that, like I love you always searched for unavailable men before you realized what you really wanted and, started to do that work is that there was 3 types and it was long distance, ones people who weren't single or who weren't emotionally available.
Yes. Okay. So these are my 3 particular brands of kryptonite of unavailability. I happen to think that they are probably most people's kryptonite as well. But if you do the work that's outlined in Relationship Ready, you'll find what's there for you as well. Right. And so it may fit into these boxes. It may not, but I like to put these 3 I'm constantly ranting and raving about. People who follow me on my social media are probably like, oh my God, we're talking about this again. I'm like, yes, we are always talking about this. So there are really 3 types of unavailability. So I discovered, when I took the time, basically one of the biggest chunks of work that's in this program, in this Relationship Ready program, is that I ask people to take an inventory of their relationships, of everyone they've been physical with, and really even those people that they had crushes on. Maybe there was like an emotional thing, but it never got physical. Like just if it was an important milestone in your life or you got physical with them, it's important to do this inventory. And I ask people to kind of assess their relationships along a number of dimensions. And when you do this work, you get to kind of uncover your patterns. And some of them you're going to know, right? Some of you're like, oh, duh, I know that one. But some of them, when you're like,
I literally did this work. It's so interesting because all the different things you lay out to do back in like May of 2020, I was like, I'm over sleeping with random people. Like I'm done. So I was like, I'm going to do that work. I'm going to write down everyone I've been with, person, dated, made out with anything, and write out the patterns. And I was like, I wish I don't have the file. So I did it again this past week, but I was like, I remember doing it and being like, and like, I could just see my pattern and my behavior just repeat itself over and over and over, and coming back to like standing up for what you want and saying like, this is actually like what I'm interested in. I realized that this past time when I did it, I was like, oh, I didn't stand up for myself with that guy. Oh, I didn't vocalize what I wanted. And I was like, whoa.
Yes. And so I the first time I did my big one of that was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was wearing at the time these like giant infinity scarves. They were like so chunky and luxurious. So I was wearing one all the time. But every time I wrote a new thing, I would just scream into that scarf like, I can't believe again. I can't believe I did it again. Okay. So after I had done all that, I really distilled my kind of kryptonite into these 3 types of unavailability. And the first one is that they, I will speak in my own experience, which is heteronormative. But of course, one of the things that I think is so great about this work is that it really applies regardless of gender or sexual identity. So, take what you like, leave the rest, and just know that I'm speaking from my own experience. So I know that I was born in the 80s. I was a teenager in the 90s. AOL was like making it possible for us to meet people in chat rooms. And it was like the first time where we really got to be whoever we wanted to be, whoever they wanted us to be. There was just like there was a lot of ability to not be yourself, which was amazing. And it was also the first time for me to be able to talk to people who did not live in my immediate vicinity. I had this experience. I'm like an overly sensitive child. I carried this one with me for a long time. But in the 6th grade, I had this embarrassing experience related to dating a boy that I didn't even know who he was, right? Dating as much as you can date in 6th grade. And ever since when that happened to me, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to get caught off guard like this again. No one can know that I don't know what I'm doing. So everyone that's at this school is like off limits. So the internet was awesome because then I got to meet I got to talk with people who were not in my school, who weren't in my sphere, who didn't go to, church or anything, who did not know me. And I really loved that because it allowed me to be who I wanted to be or who I thought they wanted me to be. So that was my first dating experience, my first flirtation experiences were with people on the internet. And today, of course, it's even easier to do that, So I really always thought growing up, like, oh, people get into long distance relationships off the bat. Like that's normal to like be dating somebody when I live in Iowa and they live in Florida and we just talk online all the time. That's normal. But what I discovered as I got a little older and did this work and had my heart broken a couple of times was like, oh, long distance is something that a couple consciously intentionally chooses to like endure when, there's a family illness or a job offer or whatever. And it's usually not permanent, right? So that was a huge mindset shift for me. And I think it's important to just the clients that I work with, nobody likes the suggestion. I don't know why. I guess it's just because the internet does make it so easy to meet people from all over, right? And we are so attracted to it's supremely safe because, it's really unlikely to come to fruition. But, I try to tell my clients if they live with more than 30 minutes away from you, that's a pretty long haul. Even 45 gets to be like, oh my God, that's almost an hour each way, whatever. So that's kind of my general rule around that. The second type of unavailability is that they're not single, which sounds simple. This sounds easy. Are you single? Are you not?
The thing is, it sounds so simple, but then I think people will get caught up, even like work relationships, when like my friend was just telling me the other day, she was like, my coworker has a girlfriend, but he never talks about his girlfriend. And he seems to be flirting with me.
He is. I'm sure of it.
Right. And so and it can come across as such a simple unavailability thing, but then there's always a story with it. When you attach emotions with it, then that simplicity just flies to the wind.
Totally. And one of the places that so I had a couple of experiences here, right? So by the time I got to university, I was kind of done with the super long distance stuff. That was mostly like high school fantasy stuff. And then by the time I got to university, I was surrounded by all these women that I really didn't feel, I was in a sorority. I didn't really feel like I fit in. And in fact, somebody had told me, one of the older sorority sisters told me to my face that I ended up there on accident, that I was never supposed to be there anyway. And there were all these like, it was complicated, but a lot of the women that I ended up living with during this time period are still friends of mine today. I had my own self-worth work to do, but living with I lived with 11 women who were all like size 00. And at the time I was like size 16. And it doesn't matter, but it does, because I just felt so much like I was not a part of their crew, like I was not a part of them. And I had a lot of work to do to get through some of that stuff. But one of the things I did was that I became the cool girl friend. So these girls were always taking time to do their makeup, their hair, their outfits, whatever. And in the meantime, I was hanging out with their boyfriends that came over to the house and were like ready to roll. And so me and these guys would be like drinking beers, doing shots, doing whatever. And I became that very low maintenance, requires nothing kind of cool chick, cool girl person, which is a whole nother story. And this time I started like kind of pining after my girlfriend's boyfriends because they were giving me attention. We were hanging out, and I was, the rom-com industrial complex also feeds into this, but I was kind of hoping that one day one of them would just look at me and be like struck by how low key and casual and effortlessly beautiful I was and whatever, and always ready on time and so low maintenance. I was always hoping that one of them would decide I was like the girl of their dreams. And obviously that didn't happen. And it's okay that it didn't happen, but it was just this distorted perception that I have had around pining after men who were involved with other women. And then the final piece of this comes into play when we think about divorce and separation. So I have a lot of clients who, and I've done this myself too, where I dated a guy who was getting, air quotes, getting divorced, right? But they're still living together. Separation hasn't really occurred. Nobody's done any paperwork yet. And the reality is, like, divorce is painful. I've been through one myself. It's uncomfortable. It comes with baggage. And so typically my advice around clients dating people who are in the process of divorce is that you wait until you set them aside for a year. If somebody's going through a divorce, I really believe they need about a year at least to process it.
Similar to what you said about sobriety too, is having a year while you're in recovery, because that there's so much that you're processing when you're getting sober that you should take that year and not be dating.
1,000%. That is very much my recommendation around that as well. And so, yeah, if you're divorced, like nobody with like awesome communication skills and, great and no baggage ever ends up divorced, right? So it's like, there's stuff that happens that people have to work through, and we like to gloss that over. And there's always that, I feel like a lot of times there's that explanation of like, oh, but her wife cheated on her and she was so good. She showed up all the time, but it was her wife that was so bad, or, and it's like, okay, then she has work to do to figure out why she stayed with somebody who was, stepping out on her or whatever. So divorce is one that shouldn't be as tricky, but sometimes is tricky. And then the final piece of availability is emotional availability, which of course of these three types of kryptonite is like the most difficult to identify. But the way I kind of shortcut the definition of emotional availability is that, like, look, at this stage, by the time we're in our 20s, almost all of us, 20s, 30s, almost everyone's gone through some shit. And the hallmark of emotional availability is to be able to have looked at your shit, have processed it with somebody, and to not like hemorrhage it out on the first date. So if you're on a date with somebody who suddenly starts hemorrhaging their emotional baggage to you, it's like, oh, they have not found an appropriate way to be vulnerable with this stuff. And so like they may be lacking a little bit of emotional availability.
Absolutely. And I love that that's one of your kind of like rules or tips when you're going into dating, is to not, to tell your story within an appropriate amount of time, and, be able to authentically be yourself on a first date, but also not be like, this is everything I've gone through ever, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it's important because I used to do that, right? So one of my favorite things to do, especially during the drinking days, was I would tell anyone who would listen my tragic story, right? And one of the things that's interesting is that in the age of, open discussion of shame and guilt, and like what Brené Brown talks about vulnerability, it's sometimes I think we can be inappropriately vulnerable in order to be manipulative, right? So I want to sit down and tell you everything about me. And it's not really so much that I'm being vulnerable and we're building intimacy. It's that I'm attention seeking and I'm hoping to get you to love me or do something for me or date me or take me somewhere, right? So there is actually, I think, a really fine line between being appropriately vulnerable with somebody that we've built some trust with, that we know is a safe person to be vulnerable with, and being inappropriately vulnerable and just like showing up and hemorrhaging all of our stuff on somebody.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's easy to not realize these tendencies. And so I love one of the things that you outline to become relationship ready is to take time off. Don't be like, if you're a heterosexual, as we are straight women, just don't talk to any men and cut that off. So you're focusing on yourself. And it's funny, I read the book in May, but I ended up I called it like No Boy August. And I took August off of like talking to any boys, which was, I realized the first time I'd ever done that, like my whole life. Yeah. It's crazy when you are someone who like just loves being in relationships and talking to new people and doing all of that. I'd never realized I'd taken time off of, constantly seeking the next person.
Yeah. And I think that's so valuable. And it kind of speaks to what I mentioned before, which is I hadn't done that either. And when I bottomed out with that guy that I had the arrangement with, and I called my girlfriend to do this work, she's like, well, look, you're going to have to do, I'm going to ask you to do no one-on-one contact with men while we do this work. Now, at that point, I was in so much pain that I was like, I will do anything. And I also did not think it was going to take me I thought it was going to take me 30 days. I thought like, okay, I'm gonna go on like a 30-day dick detox situation here. I'm gonna just
I love the word dick detox. Like everybody should do a dick detox.
Just try it because honestly, it's interesting to see your own reaction to it, right? So like if Jess and I even talking about it now is giving you this like, it's like kind of poking at you like, ew, I would never do that. I don't want to do that. Why would I want to, it's like, okay, well, maybe you're like really getting something from these interactions. But the thing that was really cool about taking that time to, and look, I hung out with men in mixed company. I still went to dinners with friends that included men and women, but like, I just stopped always reaching out to men first because I was that kind of drama queen. Eventually, by this stage, I'd become that kind of drama and attention seeker where it would be like, if something bad happened to me, I would immediately tell my air quotes best guy friends, i.e. guys that I was always waiting to fuck or guys who were always waiting to fuck me. That's just how it was for me. Okay. Doesn't have to be that way for everyone, but I think that some of us can at least acknowledge that these guy friends that we keep around is because we either have feelings for them or they have feelings for us. And it feels good to get their attention. So I would always just message them right away. And I would never really be, and that container was never particularly safe because of like the feelings that could develop, right? And so when I stopped interacting one-on-one with men and I started doing it with women, I first of all built these incredible relationships with women in my life that I never would have otherwise built. And having those relationships with women gave me an opportunity to really practice some of the new behaviors that I would need to use in my romantic relationships when the stakes were higher. So it was like so when I got into dating and I had to show up and say like, oh, that hurt my feelings, or I don't like that. It wasn't the first time I'd said it because I'd actually already been practicing honoring myself and my truth and being me with my girlfriends. And in which was a supremely safe space. It taught me a lot about resilience. It taught me a lot about reciprocity. It taught me a lot about all the things that I actually require in my romantic relationships, but that I'd never been able to practice because it always felt like too dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that makes so much sense because I think in dating, it's hard to, be completely comfortable and be yourself, especially, I think that's why we need time off of talking to guys because it gives us a chance to, get connected with our own self-worth because when we're going to guys for things and if there's that interest in fucking each other, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I don't want to like tell him too much or like, say all my feelings because then like he might not like me anymore. But, getting to a point where you're like, I'm confident within myself and I don't need to like get that external validation from them all the time is so important.
It's a huge shift. It is really a huge shift in the way that we show up in the world and that we show up for ourselves and that we honor ourselves. And it's also a huge shift in the way that we receive honor and attention from other people because we don't need it, right? We're not desperate for it in a way that we maybe used to be. So yeah, I agree. Yeah. I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad that you did August of, kind of like a detox in August. How did it go? How did it feel?
It felt good and it felt weird. It was like, I remember at the end of July, this guy had ghosted me like months before, but then during quarantine, we're in lockdown, people are getting bored, showed back up and I was like, goodbye. And then I had like a low moment months later and I like messaged him and then he was like, yeah, we can hang out. And then like within an hour, I was like, nope, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Nope, and then I like went on a walk. And I was like, no, we're not doing this. We're spending 30 days. We're not talking to guys. I've never done this before. And it's like, and I was getting ready to go move too. So I'm like, perfect timing. Why would I want to meet anyone right now anyway when I'm about to move across the country for a bit? Like, no. And it was so helpful. And I found like, I have thought about doing it again and like and I'm in a period of space right now where I'm like, I'm just going to focus on myself and stop like, constantly looking because the dating game, man, that gets tiring.
It does.
When you have your list too, and I love how much your book intertwined with like everything I was doing. I didn't do it in like a specific order, but that's the beauty of it. It's like all the tips you give, they can come up at different times.
That's right. Pick up what you need when you need it. I want to tell you, one of the things that's so cool about the story you just told is that it really reminds me of one of, I think, the most powerful tools that we have as women and we forget, which is you are always allowed to change your mind. So it's fine. If you do, if you're like, oh, I'm doing a detox, whatever. And then in a moment of whatever, you text somebody and you're like, whatever. And then he's like, oh, let's do this. And then you were like, wait a minute, that was an accident. I didn't mean to do that. I'm not interested. It's like, sometimes we start to like take these steps towards these unavailable partners or these relationships that we don't really want or whatever it is. And then we go, well, I mean, I already messaged them, so I don't want them to think I'm a bitch. I don't want them to think I'm crazy. What if I can't just, and it's like, no, you are allowed to say, hey, I shouldn't have reached out and I'm actually not interested. And it's so powerful to separate that, divorce that from what culturally gets created for us, which is that if we change our minds or if we are honest and straightforward is probably more accurate. When we're honest and straightforward about what we want, culturally, sometimes that makes us a bitch or that makes us rude or whatever. And it's like, well, I'm not a bitch. It's just like, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to text you. I don't want to go out with you. So like, sorry, not going to do it, you know?
Yeah. And I think I've had that fear too of like being super straightforward and saying exactly what I want and not scaring guys off or being intimidating or making me unlikable when really that's the fastest way to save your time, really.
That's right. And honestly, I think this is a perfect segue to what you mentioned, which is that, dating gets to be exhausting. It's really and it's like, even in this COVID era where things have changed so much and we're not doing as much outside of our houses, as women, we have so many incredible opportunities at our doorstep right now. Technology makes things accessible to us that allow us to choose ourselves in ways that we have never been able to before. For so long, patriarchy has required that, if you want a book deal, you have to pitch it to somebody and you have to get chosen to do it. Somebody has to choose you to do that. If you want to have a radio show, you have to pitch a station and get chosen to be on a show. And it's like with technology today, you can write your own book. You can choose yourself and write your own book. You can choose yourself and host your own podcast. You can choose yourself and build your own business. You can choose yourself and create a product. It's like, we don't need anyone's permission to do all of these incredible things that are not dating, by the way. And so when you add dating on top of it, it's like, you're busy. You do not have time to be indulging anyone that's kind of like meh. It's like, it's important that we really honor what we want and that we learn to say no to what we don't, so that we don't waste our most valuable asset, which is time.
Absolutely. And that's why I love too that you lay out, and I ended up doing this with my therapist too, is I like to call them like my non-negotiables or like what you desire in a partner. And then I am just obsessed. Like, this is like exactly what this is my favorite part to chat about. Your like recommendations or dating rules. And so the two biggest that like literally like will come out and people will be like, whoa, like I remember seeing this and being like, whoa, I think this is a great idea, but this is like scary as fuck actually trying to put into practice is not kissing until the fourth date and not sleeping together until you're not sleeping together or having any sort of overnight thing. 'Cause also if you're sleeping over, probably gonna have sex.
Probably gonna do it.
Until you're exclusive. And the purpose, I feel like, for this is to keep checking in with yourself, to go back to that non-negotiable list and say, okay, how's it going? Is it a genuine connection? Because I am with you. The physical stuff, just my brain just goes haywire.
Yeah. Look, I would love to be the kind of like third wave feminist that's like, I can have sex with people and I don't even care. It's fine. Like, that's just not me. And that's okay. But it means that I really need to be intentional about who I get physical with, because I know that once I get physical with you, it's going to shift my perspective of all this. It's going to make it much easier for me to rationalize behavior that I would not otherwise tolerate. It's going to make it easier for me to kind of like turn any red flag green, to be totally honest. It's just like after years of experience, I'm just going to accept that that's the way that I am. But those two recommendations are born out of, were born out of the experience of finishing this work, right? So like I said, it took me an entire year to do this work, 11 months. And then I felt like, okay, I'm going to like open my front door and like my person's going to fall from the sky. Like, okay, universe, like I did what you asked and now where's my boyfriend, right? And that's not what happened. So, one of the first dates I went on was with a guy that I had been flirting with prior to doing the work. So after I finished, I texted him and said like, hey, do you want to go out? And he was like, yes, I do. And we went out and we had this like, it was a disaster, to be totally honest. And I ended up sleeping with him and it was a nightmare. And like the whole thing, I woke up the next morning and just called this woman. And I was like, I can't believe I just did an entire year of work on this stuff. And I went out and the first date I went on, I did the same old shit. Like, what the fuck? And she was like, it's okay, because let's look at, and he ended up calling me and saying like, I'm not available. I just went through a bad breakup. I'm living in my parents' house, blah, blah, blah. And I was able to hear that and go, okay, I can hear you telling me you're not available. I'm going to delete you from my phone. I'm going to block you on social media. And I'm just you're not for me. Which in a previous life, I would have, prior to this, I would have spent like months chasing that guy. and trying to convince him that he was available and all this stuff, right? So then after that disastrous first date, I went to another mentor of mine and she was like, you might want to consider waiting 4 dates before you kiss someone. And I was like, what? Are you serious? I've been waiting a whole year. And she's like, if you have this pattern of just like hopping into bed with people, it's important that you give yourself some space to get to know them. And so I did. And one of the things that's great about this particular tool, if you are willing to use it, is it gives you an opportunity to set a boundary, to say, hey, one of the ways that I date is that I require 4 dates before I make out with somebody. And it gives you the opportunity to get comfortable setting a boundary, to get comfortable letting that sit there. And then it actually gives you an opportunity to get some information about the person you're dating, right? Because what I want for you, Jess, is for you to say that to somebody and for them to say, awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Right?
And then you learn that they respect your boundary. And it's so crazy when you're saying this. And I'm like thinking about my past like year and a half of being single. And I'm like, first of all, like when we'll kiss each other, like I go home and I don't think about what we talked about. I think about the kiss the whole time.
Of course, you're like, oh, you're like so turned on. You're like, oh,
yeah, exactly. And I haven't been going on this rule. We'll usually kiss on the first or the second date. And I have not had a third date since I exited a relationship like 2 years ago. I've only had first dates and I've only had 2 second dates in the past year. And so there you go. Like if you're going to be like, no, you can't kiss me till the 4th date. Well, also you're going to stop risking getting COVID.
Also in the COVID era, you're right. It's a great suggestion in the COVID era. But the other thing is it gives you some you're right. It gives you some information about how somebody hears your boundary. And so I just want to make clear, if you set this boundary with a person that you're interested in and they start negotiating with you, oh, what about 2? What about 4? Why 4? Or they start asking a ton of questions about why, insisting why. You do not owe them an explanation. You do not have to negotiate with them. And that is information that suggests that they cannot hear what you're saying and respect your boundaries. So if this person can't hear you say, hey, I don't want to make out until 4 dates, they're not going to be able to hear you say, hey, this is an important thing that happened in our relationship and we need to talk about it, right? It's giving you information about how well they listen and about how much they respect boundaries. So I actually think like, I never thought that I would be someone who's like, go test your person. And I don't know that this is like a test, because it's not just a test for the sake of a test. It's actually just a good boundary and you get to see how people respond to them. And I'll tell you, my husband and I had like a ninja date that I didn't really realize was a date. And then we had like an official first date. And on our official first date, I told him this thing. And I was like, so this is our second date. And he was like, this is our first date. And I was like, no, this is our second date. And he was like, that wasn't a date. We were just getting, this is our first date. So he was like he really wanted to be like above board in respecting this boundary that I set and then immediately tried to undermine.
Tried to undermine it because I think I would too. And he was like, no, this is first. We still got 3 more to go.
That's right. Yeah. So I love that. And then the thing about, sleeping together really is, I do suggest this for clients I work with, because it's like, look, we get involved in ways we don't even really understand. And, I want you to have seen, not only do I really want you to be exclusive, but I also want you to have seen some emotions of this person. Like I want you to have seen him when he's angry. I want you to have seen her when she's devastated. I want you to have seen her when she's afraid, right? Because those big feelings, sometimes the way people deal with those big feelings is a deal breaker to us. Mm-hmm. And if you can know that beforehand, then I think it will save some heartache. But, it is hard. It is challenging to see some of those big feelings early on in a relationship. So at the very least, I want you to be exclusive if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think like it's notorious to have like a long talking stage and have unclear intentions and not like, yes, I just listened to a podcast episode the other day actually. And this girl, she's gay and she has a girlfriend, but wouldn't call her girlfriend. She was like, we've been talking for over a year and we're exclusive. And like, she's my person and I'm her person, but still wouldn't say girlfriend. And I'm like, oh my God, that's insane. But everybody's so different about that. But having the exclusive conversation, I think is even more important than having the boyfriend girlfriend conversation.
I agree. If you are looking for long-term monogamy, then yes, having that exclusive conversation is really important to know. Because if you're looking for that and your partner's on a completely different page, then it's like, they're not your person.
Yeah. You know what I love? I just thought about this, that like thinking about spending, a month or 11 months or, a
Mhm.
year not talking to guys and thinking about not kissing a guy till the fourth date and not sleeping with
Uh-huh.
them till you're exclusive, all can feel really scary and uncomfortable. And like, this is so absurd. And I think that's when it's like the best sign to like try it out and do it. Because if it's
Yeah.
making you uncomfortable, it's clearly something you're not used to and you can learn a lot about yourself through it.
Oh, I think that's such a great way to say, like, that's such a great indicator. How does this feel in your body? How are you reacting to this? Is this something that's making you go like, that's making you super scared? And the reality is this, remember, like all of this is suggestion. This is
Yeah.
all just something, this is my experience. It's what worked for me. It's a suggestion that I've seen work for plenty of women. I'm so excited. One of the first women I worked with got married during COVID. She and I worked together maybe 2 or 3 years ago, right as I was writing the book, before the book was out. She and I did one-on-one work together. And she, it took like 6 or 8 months to do the work. And then she dated for a couple of months and she met this guy and they dated for a year. They got married during COVID and they're having a baby in July. And so it's like,
Oh,
she's not the only person that it's worked for, right? But it's really fun. And I have
yeah.
another girlfriend that I did this with, or not girlfriend, another client that I worked with that is in a long-term relationship. So I personally love, working with women one-on-one. I have a lot of different ways that we can work together, to be honest, whether it's like the book or one-on-one or in a group. I love working with women, giving them the framework to say, look, these are the suggestions. And if you follow all of them, you will probably have what I had at the end of it, but you don't have to. It's not like you're not going to get a gold star if you do, or an A plus plus. It's just like take what you like and leave the rest, and see if it changes anything about how you show up in your relationships and how you honor yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I think the biggest part of all of this work is, yeah, we can say it's to get relationship ready, but more than anything, it's to get to know yourself and get comfortable with yourself and standing up for what you want.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, honestly, too much of my life was spent in the pain of shoving down what I wanted so I could be what everyone else wanted. And I
Yeah.
think that some of that honoring what we want comes with growing up. I know that it was easier for me to do that in my 30s than it was in my 20s, but I also did this work in my 30s. And so I don't know exactly what piece of, what piece or what action I did that made that easier, but, it happened for me. And I think it has to happen for all of us at some stage, where we learn how to just honor who we are and what we want and be confident with that.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I love that. Takes me into the kind of last thing I wanted to chat about. And I wrote
Mhm.
down one of the quotes that you put in the book. And
Okay.
that's like, when you do all this work, I feel like we're both very energetic. We're planners. We love to like take all the action we can.
Yeah.
And then there's one thing that definitely is not in my like instinct that I have to work on, is letting go
Yeah.
and letting the universe take control. And you say in the book, I'm doing a double-sided puzzle that's black and white with no edges. The universe gives us what we need.
Yeah, no, I love that. There are two things about that actually that I think are so valuable. One is that, for those of us that are perfectionists, that are gold star students, A plus plusers, we can fall into this trap of like doing all the worksheets, all the workbooks, taking the courses, do the class, and then we learn all this stuff about ourselves, but we never become willing to practice it. So
Yeah.
half of the battle, it's actually, honestly, I think a quarter of this is about learning about identifying your patterns, going back and looking at where you've behaved differently, where you need to behave differently, whatever that is. And then we have to go practice it, which for those of us, we're like, no, thank you. I would rather just get this perfect before I practice it.
I'm going to sit in my bubble of just being a good student and trying before I have to be thrown out into the actual world of doing it.
Yes. So you will grow so much by practicing, right? And by just trusting, look, I learned this new thing about myself that I need to stand up for myself. So now I'm going to go on some dates and I'm going to practice standing up for myself. It's going to be okay. Sometimes I'm going to do a better job of it than other times. Sometimes I'm going to sometimes I'm going to not stand up for myself and go, God damn it. I wish I would have done that differently, but I'm going to practice it. And that's half the battle. The other thing is about this idea of setting aside everything I think I know about how it's supposed to look, and just trusting that my job is to show up and honor myself, to value myself and my time, to be honest with my partners or my potential partners, and trust that the universe, energy, God, higher power, spirit, whatever, if you can believe in anything out there, nature, whatever it is, will bring you what you need, right? And so often we get in our own ways and we really kind of fuck shit up because we're intent on look, we didn't generate this. This is something called the linear social script. That's the thing that society constructs around us about, like, you go to high school and then you go to college and then you meet the guy and then you have the 2.5 kids and then you have the house and the white picket fence.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, it's not the fear that we have around timeline. It doesn't necessarily come completely from our own hearts. I mean, there is this structure that's created around it for us, but when we can set that aside and just go, look, I'm good. And I'm going to trust that if I continue to show up in the world, honoring who I am and what I desire and living my life embodied in those values, that like what's mine will come to me.
Yeah, exactly. And letting that go. And, you know, I think I get definitely so caught up in hoping, you know, like once I meet a guy I'm interested in, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I just went like 6,000 steps forward and I can like already see our future home with our children. Like, it's just crazy. Yeah. But that's why it's so important, I think, too, to just have that mix of like, you know, turning it over to what you believe in and trusting that whatever's meant to be will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Because, and you know, the reality is like, there's some humanness and something fun to the daydreaming that we do of like, when we meet somebody and there's like a great spark and there's great kind of like, you know, I would never want people to stop dreaming about that or like, you know, envisioning their future together. But there's some stuff that we have to do kind of on the ground as well in order to get there, which is to keep checking in and to keep going. You know, I really like to think of dating as an information gathering process. So we keep gathering information about our dream guy and we keep kind of evaluating it and assessing how it fits in with what we desire. And we keep being honest with ourselves about whether or not it's aligned. And that is the place where it gets to be tough, because sometimes we want something to really be aligned with what we desire and it's not. And we're like, but it could be, but it might be, you know, it's like, So it's a tough part to really be honest about whether those two things are what is and what you desire are aligned. But the more we practice it, the better we get at it. And the more we practice showing up and advocating for ourselves and being honest for ourselves and honoring what's true for us, you know, the less we care about whether or not we come off as bitchy, the more we get to step into our power and just go, look, this is me. If it's not for you, that's fine. Doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean I'm bad. It just means you can't roll with me. See you never. On to the next, right?
Yeah, see you never. But yeah, well, and I think it's so important to remember too, is that like there is so many fish in the sea, because I think it can be easy to get into the scarcity mindset of like, oh my gosh, like there's this one thing or these few things that don't fully align, but like what if there's not another after this? And like, and then it's like, no, there's so many people in the world.
Yeah, it's true. And, you know, one of the things about the ideals list, you mentioned it briefly, that I think is so valuable is we make this ideals list about, you know, it's really an exercise in unlimited thinking about your ideal partner. Then we look at that list and we turn it on ourselves and we go, am I embodying these ideals? So if I'm looking for a partner that is, air quotes, rich, am I rich? Okay, what does it mean to be rich? Well,
I love this. I love turning it back on yourself and being like, what if these are my ideals about someone else? Then like looking at myself, am I financially stable if I want that in someone else?
Right, yeah. Am I paying my bills on time? Do I, you know, whatever. If I want someone who drives a nice car, okay, what does my car look like? Have I had it detailed? Do I take care of it? Is it full of gas? Do I pay insurance on it? Like just really starting to look at like, these are the things that we are looking for in partners. Do I also embody these ideals? And then finally, because that list can get rather long, I work with a woman named Kendall Merritt. She and I often run a group coaching container together. She actually suggests narrowing that big long list down to your top 5, which I think you mentioned saying you did with your therapist. And so then once you've got your top 5, you can almost like write it down on a little index card, keep it in your pocket, keep it with you when you date, so that when you go back to your, you know, when you part ways, you can pull it out and go, okay, where did they fall on these 5 things? But the other thing is when you've got it narrowed down to 5, you can go, okay, well, this person has 3. This person has 3 of the 5. And for now, like that, it feels like I have a full body yes. It feels good. It feels good to me to continue to spend time with them. But I'm also going to know that like I really am looking for somebody with the 5, right? So sometimes having the top 5 is a really good way to kind of narrow that stuff down as well.
It is. And I think it's amazing even to have a physical thing to like literally in your notes on your phone, just like keep going back to it after every date. Okay. I'm curious what your kind of advice is in COVID times of dating. Cause I feel like in some ways it's great because it takes out the physical aspect, you know, sooner or like, you know, earlier because you're doing Zoom dates and all of that. But what, like the kissing rule? Do you count a Zoom date as a real date?
This is so interesting because, yes, everything is changing in COVID. And I do like the idea of counting. I don't know, actually. I honestly haven't thought about it. I haven't thought about that specific. What do you think? Do you think a Zoom date counts as a real date? Does that feel like the same?
I think if you have had 1 or 2, like the first 2 times you've interacted is on Zoom and then you hang out in person, I don't know. I feel like if it's like the first 2 times, they shouldn't actually count as a part of the 4 dates because it's different being with someone like physically.
I think so too. Okay. I'm glad you're on board with that because I really feel like Yeah, I would still like you to have at least 2 in-person dates, ideally 4, before you smooch, because again, like it's different energy to be in person with somebody and to be out in the world with them and to be doing that stuff. Otherwise, as far as COVID dating is concerned, I actually really like the idea of being able to like, order food to somebody's house, or, being able to both order from the same place and then eat together over Zoom. Heading back into spring. Are you in Canada? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Toronto. Yeah.
Okay, you're in Toronto. That's what I thought. Okay, so spring might be a little more delayed for you. I'm in Portland, Oregon, so like today it's beautiful and 50 degrees outside, and so we're starting to get to a place where we can like, people can date outside again. It's not quite so cold, rainy, whatever. So we are headed back into the summer season of distance dating. But I think COVID really does also, especially early in COVID, I was suggesting to women, look, this is actually a great time to take a break from dating and like do the work that you've been putting off doing. And there's always time for that. But, COVID has also given us a really good opportunity to kind of set aside our expectations or what we think we know about the timeline around dating, and to just go, look, I don't have a lot of control over this. I'm just going to continue to get to know people, and I'm going to continue to practice honoring myself and just see where it goes.
Absolutely. I think that's such great advice. And I think all of this comes back to listening to ourselves and being honest with ourselves and getting courageous enough to put it into practice.
Oh God, that's it. Wrap it up, put a bow on it. I love it, because that practice part is really one of the most challenging pieces of it.
This conversation was such a fun one to have, and it just feels such a dream come true to be able to have authors on my show that I just read their books and just love so much. If you are interested in reading Heidi's book, it is as cheap as $3.49 for Kindle. You can find it on Amazon. It's also on Audible, and then she has a lot of incredible offers as well. She does group coaching for $50 a month. You can quit at any time. It's for single women who want to elevate their love life, and she also has some online courses. She has one-on-one coaching, and then as well, I have a bonus human to human episode coming out this Friday with Heidi, where she really quickly, in 10 minutes somehow, outlines how she wrote her book and self-published it on Amazon, and just it really outlines how simple it can be for us to follow our dreams. So stay tuned for that, and make sure you check out Heidi on Instagram at Heidi B Coaching, and she has her website www.heidibcoaching.com. And if you are interested in writing your own book or just hearing more of this awesome gal talk, check out the bonus episode coming this Friday. Thank you for listening. If you are trying to level up your love life, become relationship ready, let me know if you like this episode. Feel free to DM me on Instagram at Jessica J. McDonald or at Human to Human Pod. And yeah, I mean, we're all in this journey together, so feel free to reach out. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on Friday. And then we have our regular episodes on Tuesday. Thanks for listening.